What's a time when you met someone but something just felt off about them? What happened? By Storybook_03.
PMME_or_lovely_boobs says, I'm currently in residency, but this happened in medical school. I noticed a patient in the ER who had a pretty bad injury to her face was with a sketchy-looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient, but I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor, who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone. The guy left immediately, which I thought was odd. The patient ended up saying that she was being trafficked and the guy who was with her had confiscated her passport and forced her to work as a prostitute. I knew the city my medical school was in was somewhat of a hub for human trafficking, so I'm glad I trusted my instincts on that one. I hope that patient is in a better place now.
CM901 says, guy in high school, nobody associated with him. He was strange, but not like a guy who got bullied or anything. Something was odd about him. Like not obvious, but you got a skin-crawling feeling. Flash forward 3 years after graduating and he's in the news. Fucker tried to snatch a 10-year-old from Walmart. Tried to abduct a child. Cops tracked him down and he went to prison.
manbearbatman says, I had a teacher in middle school that just seemed a little off. He was like 45, lived with his dad, and had a bad temper. He would seem kinda normal, but the moment the kid misbehaved he would freak out. At the end of class he would also always whip out his guitar and sing Puff the Magic Dragon for us. Anyway, I found out many years later that he was arrested for possession of child porn.
ElkcState says, I bought a 4-bedroom home and decided I would rent out a couple rooms. I registered on Roomster and some other similar website. I received a message from a guy and his profile said he loved dogs, had 2 of his own, and needed a room for a year. Very cut and dry. I set up a time to meet with him at my house, so one afternoon he drives up. He has a 2002 to 2005 Ford Expedition, rusted out, hauling a 16-feet white trailer. He gets out, has military-style pant, tan t-shirt, gun on hip, knife on the other side and fantastic posture. I would ask him questions and he would respond in a very matter-of-fact tone. For example, I asked if he had 2 dogs, trying to make small talk, and he would say correct. If the answer was no, he would say negative. All in a very stern tone. Anyways, we talk for a while and he is just a weird dude, but I like people that are 180 from me. I always thought of it as a good thing because it forced me to see things from someone else's point of view. Turned out he was in the military for 8 years and was honorably discharged for an injury he had in Iraq. So anyways, I couldn't put my finger on what was so odd about him, so I shrugged it off. Dude was able to pay first and last month's rent plus deposit, so I said fuck it and he moved in. One day, my dog is playing with his toy and takes it into the new roommate's room by pushing the door open. See, I like to give roommates their space since they are paying for it. I don't find it okay to enter or exit without permission. When my dog pushes open the door, I see boxes stacked on top of each other all over the room. In between them is a small walkway. I go to get the toy from my dog and I look to the right and I see one lone recliner chair. I think, Jesus, he must be sleeping in the chair. Then I look to the left and see the closet, which instead of clothes has a sleeping bag inside on the floor. Now the closet is 8 feet long by maybe 2 feet wide. Dude was sleeping in the closet with his back against the wall in a room filled with boxes and one chair with an AR-15 next to him. Craziest shit ever.
Dramalpaca says, my aunt's ex-boyfriend. When I was a kid, he'd give me goodnight kisses on the lips that were far too long, and I always found it weird. Turns out he was a child molester, so there's that.
JuliaHussien says, guy who used to frequent a bar I worked at would always try to get me to go on a date with him. Even though he was attractive, I would always decline because whenever he spoke the hairs on my arm would go up for a reason I didn't understand. Years later, he's on trial for drugging several bar industry staff and taking them home to rape them while his pregnant wife videotaped. They would spend the night and leave the next morning thinking they just partied too hard.
AngelFox1 says, guy at work. The day he started, I had my back to the office. I never even saw him, but the hair on my neck stood up and I got the shivers. I always knew right where he was 'cause something was just off. I told my supervisor, he gave me the creeps. My supervisor said is a great guy. Give him a chance, you'd like him. A couple of weeks later everyone was going to the bar. I declined because I just didn't feel that good. Next day, my boss comes up to me, OMG. You were so right about M. He got in a fight with his GF in the parking lot at the bar and bit her nose off. The following week we heard he was being extradited out east because he had raped a 14-year-old girl.
GratitudeRock says, I had a friend who had this odd obsession about living like a sitcom where characters just pop into each other's houses without being let in first. He idolized that sense of ultimate freedom and social trust. Let's be real, this doesn't actually exist. I caught him once trying to enter my basement from the rear of the house. I was a kid, so I thought it was funny and weird. I told him to stop being a dumbass and use the front door next time. Later on he ended up robbing my house and getting arrested.
Chafo40 says, went to school with a kid who was nice enough but gave off a very weird vibe. A couple of years after we graduated, he shot himself while the cops had his house sounded.
Empty refrigerator says, met a dude in high school, immediate nope feeling emanating from this dude. Years later he kicked a Hungarian takeaway delivery driver to death with his uncle in a random act of violence.
Cyclopropagative says, met a guy at a wedding, very patient, calm and collected type of dude. I couldn't place a finger but something about him felt really off. Fast forward 2 years, the guy gets life sentence after he murdered a 17-year-old boy whom he catfished for 1 year as a girl. Apparently the other guy insisted on meeting with whom he thought was his GF, and upon discovering his real identity, a fight ensued which eventually led to his death.
Aeraen says, a new guy at work that everyone loved. He was good-looking and personable, and even management seemed to fawn all over him. I didn't actively dislike him, but I wasn't comfortable with him, either. Within 6 months, he was arrested for siphoning off credit card numbers.
Deleted says, I work at a theater. One day during a show, a woman left the auditorium in tears and asked one of my supervisors if she could move because the man next to her had been touching her inappropriately. My sup offered to throw the guy out, move him, etc., but she was too afraid of making a scene, so we moved her to VIP seating. My sup then figured out where the man had been, went in, and convinced him and his wife to come out into the lobby, then escorted them out the doors. I was taking tickets that shift, and as the man passed me to leave, I swear my entire body went cold and my heart stopped. He looked exactly like every serial killer in a crime show, greasy and totally dead in the eyes. We couldn't do anything but throw him out since the woman he targeted didn't want to make a fuss, but I went right home and showered and couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong for days after. If anything terrible happens in my hometown, I'm sure it'll be because of him.
Midas_artflower says, 2, actually. First, many years ago, our company hired an additional sales rep, who, like every other new rep, started working with the support shops first, to ensure he understood what it took to do what they were asked to accomplish. Those folks started telling me they didn't like this guy, once they learned I'd be supporting him. I always make my own mind in such matters, though. Then I met him and, immediately, I got a strong anger management issues vibe. Sure enough, in less than a year, he got pissed about something, abandoned a show and his job, flew himself home, and was never seen/heard from again. Second one was a different employer and was an even stronger negative vibe, but I couldn't ID what it was. He was one of the middle management execs and his smile just made my skin crawl, but what can you do? Then the feds showed up and took him and his computer away. Child porn and a lot of it. Eek.
Stowich85 says, years ago, I was at a rave at a geek convention and a girl started dancing with me. She was very attractive, and apparently thought I was attractive as well because we started making out shortly after. At some point it became clear that things were escalating and I told her I didn't have a condom. She said it's okay, I can get pregnant. This immediately set off a red flag to me. Did not seem right since she was in her early 20s. I'm sure sober me might have deduced that it was some sort of genetic thing or something, but drunk me was fairly on guard because having sex with a stranger with no protection on their word that they can't get pregnant is a reach. I must have shown it in my face or in my hesitation, and the girl started legit sobbing. So I spent the next 30 minutes or so sitting on the floor with my arm around this crying girl trying to extricate myself from an awkward situation. I feel like I dodged a bullet, honestly, because after she broke down it seemed pretty clear it would have been a mistake even if I had the rubber.
MNotMe412 says. Throwaway account, TLDR at the end. Mine was a priest. I went to a small Catholic school for K-8 and I was in 4th grade, so about 10 years old, when he was assigned to my parish. He was younger than most priests, probably in his 30s, and cool by priest standards, so everyone thought he was great. But literally from day one I got a vibe that something was off about him. I felt uncomfortable just being in his presence, and when he'd talk to me my skin would crawl. At the time I didn't say anything. I was pretty sheltered even for a 10-year-old girl, and I didn't really understand what bad vibes were. Plus he had never actually done anything wrong, so what was I supposed to say? That I didn't like a priest and I didn't really know why? This was all before the Catholic Church scandals broke, before Spotlight, etc., so people weren't on alert with priests the way they are now. The years went on, and by the time I was in 8th grade I still couldn't stand to be around him, and I still hadn't said anything. Then he started getting really close with my best friend. Going out of his way to talk to her, picking her for special projects. He would even go to dinner at her house every so often, with her parents there of course, and spend the entire evening talking with her. I noticed but kept my mouth shut. Then he started calling her, and that was too much for me. I told her that I didn't care if he was a priest. It was really fucking weird for a man in his 30s to be calling a 14-year-old girl several times a week on her private number. This was back in the landline days, and she had a phone with a different number than the main house, just to talk. She told me he was a priest, so it was perfectly safe, and anyway, she wasn't the only girl he talked to on the phone. I told her he skeeved me out and always had, and she said I was paranoid, but I made her promise that if he ever asked her to come to the rectory or go somewhere else with him alone, she would bring me or our other best friend along. Not that I was a badass at 14 years old and roughly 100 pounds soaking wet, but I figured there would be safety in numbers. I had no idea what grooming was at that time. I just knew he gave me an intense bad feeling and he paid way too much attention to young girls. She kept her word and didn't go anyplace alone with him. We graduated, headed off to public high school, and that was the end of that. Fast forward to 2018. The Attorney General of PA released a grand jury report containing the results of a 2-year investigation that they had done into sexual misconduct by priests in parishes across the state. As soon as I saw the article, my stomach dropped and I felt like I was going to vomit. That feeling of my skin crawling came back. I downloaded the report and didn't even read through it. I just did a Ctrl+F for his name, and big surprise, there it was. He had already had complaints and the church had tagged him for being inappropriately focused on and involved with girls, grade school and high school aged, before he was ever transferred to our parish, which had a school full of grade school girls. I felt sick because I knew. I didn't know at the time exactly what I knew, although at 14 I at least thought it was weird for a 30-something to show so much interest, but I knew in my gut he was off. The girl he was grooming and I are still best friends, and she called me and just said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you were right. You were right the whole time and I had no fucking idea." My friend was lucky, but another girl at our school wasn't. When they caught on to him at my old parish, they just shuffled him off to the next one, where according to the report he continued being inappropriate with young teen girls. And that's been the end of me with the Catholic Church and religion in general. TL, doctor, my bad feeling came from a creepy priest who was grooming my friend and other girls. Always trust your gut instinct about people no matter who they are, and teach your children the same. Just because they are a priest or a cop or another respected figure doesn't mean they're good people.
Era 1917 says, "Girl I could have slept with, but it felt like a really bad idea." Fast forward 4 years, she's a white supremacist who believes the Holocaust is a conspiracy.
TheChemicalSophie says, "Happened to me in year 8, not sure what grade this is in America. Basically me and my best friend at the time had decided to go on a trip to France. I was pretty introverted, so she was my only friend going, and we decided to share a room with her cousin who I'd never met. Then, she left after her parents split up, and I had nobody to share a room with. So when I went to the French trip meeting thing, I sat alone, and this girl had never spoke to sat next to me and said, "Yeah, Sophie, right? I'm your roommate." And I was creeped out on how she knew my name and the fact this girl I'd never spoke to was going to share a room with me. On the coach to France, I sat by her and I've never bonded so quickly with someone. She liked all the things I liked, and taught me new stuff that I now define myself with, and she told me she had severe anxiety, which makes me think about how hard it must have been for her to speak to me. 5 years later, and she's still the best friend I've ever had. It's true what they say, never judge a book by its cover.
itsJussaMe says, met one of my good friend's boyfriends. I immediately disliked him. Note, I'm pretty heavily tattooed but most of my good friends are not. I guess my friends, then, BF found women with tattoos attractive because he began to say things that grossed me out and stare at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He went on to tell me all sorts of lies about tattoos, as if I was unaware of something that I obviously collected for myself. Me, being me, I didn't accept his behavior. I called him out in front of our group. He made me uncomfortable. He was a terrible and obvious liar, entirely lacking common sense and education or even general intelligence. Example, he told me he owned a 5-bedroom beachfront home in Miami, Florida, but was currently living in a rundown mobile home from the 70s, in Alabama, on government assistance. He told me that at a state job interview to work at a wildlife preserve he wrestled a 19-foot American alligator. A quick Google search showed the largest on record in Florida at the time was less than 16 feet. Obviously, a state-run wildlife preserve would have someone with zero wildlife experience get up close and personal with a predator larger than the state's record. How else would they know if he's fit for this imaginary job/s? And so on, and so on. I calmly explained why each lie he stated was a lie, refuting his claims, and asking what satisfaction he got from blatantly lying as he did. Needless to say, I avoided spending time with him in the future to the point that I very rarely saw him over the course of the next 3 years and never had a conversation with him again. I did tell my friend that he gave me predator vibes. I told her I couldn't explain it other than instinct. I'm 90% sure that he robbed my home BC. I had a pretty uncommon firearm, less common rounds. The day after I was robbed he was reportedly threatening a mutual acquaintance with the same model and claiming it was loaded with the same type of rounds. In the following year he reportedly molested a child. I was not surprised. Edit, SP.
Hootonberg says, my grandmother hired a couple of high schoolers to help us with some yard work and a week later they were arrested because one of them strangled his own mother after she grounded him for poor grades. His friend got arrested because he and another for a total of 3 kids tried to bury her under a church fire pit.
Fallen029 says, I took care of my grandmother, who was dying of dementia-related things, until her death for about 1.5 years. One day, one of her former nurses came by to see her. My grandmother lived in an extremely small town, so I was used to people just dropping by and expecting to be let in, so I let her in. I did get an odd vibe from her though. My father was visiting and, when he saw her walk into the living room, he got real silent and, uncharacteristically, hardly spoke to her. My grandmother did though, and they had a nice enough visit, I guess. When she left, my father asked if I'd ever met her before and I said no. He told me about how, a few years ago, her husband was cheating on her and she filled up a canister of gas, drove home and tried to set him on fire to kill him. They ended up working it out and staying together, but apparently, everyone in town knew about it. She eventually, close to my grandmother's death, was working as her occasional nurse again, right before she went on hospice. I was always kind to her, but I was very weary of her and always glad when she left.
lchugluvsmemes says, there is a little girl who lives next to us in a trailer. She always wants to play, so I usually jump on the trampoline with her. The whole time I just felt like she wasn't getting treated right. She was happy, and she was well fed, and had clothes to wear and a bed to sleep in. One day, her parents weren't home, so she offered to give me a house tour. One of the most disgusting houses I have ever walked into. Infested with cockroaches and ants. The toilets look like they haven't been cleaned in years. So did the carpets, and all the furniture. She wasn't allowed in her parents' room, but she let me peek in. You couldn't even see the floor with the amount of dirty clothes everywhere. The whole house smelled very strongly of cigarette smoke and alcohol. An explanation to the 4 giant empty boxes of beer and whiskey bottles in the dumpster. I didn't know what to do because I'm only a teenager, but I let my dad know. I always walk past every day just to make sure everything is okay, and she is safe. Poor girl. I hope someday that house will get cleaned. Skeptical.
LoudBelchStabbyFart says, I was the longest resident in a rental property, so the landlord would consult with me before moving someone in. We interviewed this kid just starting college. It was a very good interview and I had 2 reservations, his eyes and that he was a teenager in an adult house. Anyways, he's a sexual predator who fails to register, and on January 2nd 4 heavily armed state police show up looking for him. Failed to tell us, by the way, we didn't think to ask. Told my landlord not to do it, but all he sees is dollar. Gets the property flagged as watchdog residence. I got pulled over for running a red light and the cop was asking me way more invasive questions, and that's how I found out the house I was living in was put on the list.
Deleted says, a classmate in 7th grade was constantly talking about perverted sexual stuff. Well, lots of kids did that, but he was even worse about it. He claimed that his dad owned a strip club and that he, the kid, had gotten one of the dancers pregnant. The next year this guy was nowhere to be seen. It turned out he had been convicted of sexually abusing a younger kid.
Cherokeejon says, I've told this story before, but when I was 3 years old I had an off feeling about a man who ended up being a child molester and trafficker. I was too young to remember this, but both parents remember it vividly, and one of the only things they agree on. I was a very extroverted, happy-go-lucky child. Our neighbors were an old retired couple. Their 30-something-year-old son moved in with them and they came by my house to introduce their son to the neighbors. Apparently I screamed and hid behind my dad's legs. My dad thought this was weird since normally I'd have walked up to him and asked to be held like I did with our neighbors. My mom tried to get me to say hi, but I refused, and my dad backed me up and let me hide behind him. A few weeks later the FBI arrested him at my neighbor's home for having a ton of child porn and soliciting minors.
Liz91 says, I had a teacher in middle school who was always off. She always looked tired, or drunk, and always slurred her words. She would just give us a warm-up and then nothing the entire class. She once napped and dropped her purse where several condoms had fallen out. Well, fast forward about 4 years, she got caught by the janitor blowing one of her students. I think he was 16, maybe 17. She had a mugshot online and was on the news.
Y_M_single says, she pretended to be my friend for 2 years, we even roomed together. She knew I was madly in love with this guy for years before I met her, and she kept trying to push me at other guys, telling me how annoying this guy was. She always got in the way when I was with him. I mentioned some other guy one time and she messaged that guy telling him to ask me out. Guy I was in love with finally kissed me the night before I moved across the country for school. I called her the first few nights crying, wondering if I had made a mistake and should move back for him. 3 days later she asked him on a date. When I confronted her, she finally admitted she had a crush on him. We didn't talk for a year after that.
Huchawali13 says, one of my friend's boyfriends. He was always just, I don't know. We all talked about how he gave a weird vibe. Anyway, they date for a hot minute and get pregnant about 3 months into the relationship. Flash forward, baby is 2 months old, she's at work one day, while he is home with baby, and he calls her to tell her baby won't wake up. Baby doesn't make it, and autopsy shows major abuse. It comes out in court what she was really going through at home. She still tried to stay by his side for a long time, but she finally got rid of him.
Pretty little peach says. Met a guy on FetLife. Supposedly he got my snap there, but I didn't have it listed, nor could I find any messages between him and I whatever. Overlooked it. We chatted for a month. Met once. He told me he loved me later that evening after our meetup. Didn't really like him, so slacked off in chatting. The next week I came out of work and he was parked there waiting on me. I luckily was on FaceTime with a friend and was able to bypass the situation rather quickly. I blocked him on Snapchat after that and didn't text him anymore. A few days later his wife of 10 years texted me a picture of their family. I confronted him and we never spoke again.
Soul Searcher 1311 says, probably different outcome than most of these stories, but I was attending a tech school for dental assisting. One of the girls in our class was very quiet. She was beautiful, had long red hair and piercing blue eyes. I didn't take notice until we started clinical, but she was a shell. I've never looked at someone so empty before. I tried to connect with her, but all of her verbal responses were robotic, like yeah right no, okay, no, thanks. She was just repeating the same phrases over and over. A week before the incident, her hair had become extremely greasy and tangled, not at all like when we started. I didn't know much about depression, so I thought nothing of it really. She took her life. I won't go into detail because the whole thing is very sad, but she very tragically took her life with no thought of the aftermath on her friends, family or her grandmother who found her. Now I know, now I'll speak up. I feel guilty because clear signs were there.
Mummy4 says, the music teacher I had in my first year at my all-girls high school was really strange and made us all uncomfortable. We all called him Mr. Fishface because he honestly looked like a trout. One afternoon I had to stay behind for detention for not doing my homework, and as I was meant to catching up on said homework, I was sat in front of his desk doing it. Then he suddenly got up from his desk and went out the room. I thought I could get something out of my bag to snack on in his absence, and then all of a sudden he strode back in and saw what I was doing. I thought he was going to reprimand me for eating, but what he did was much worse. He began smiling this horrifying creepy predator grin that literally made my heart stop. Then without even thinking of the consequences, I ran out of his dungeon like I had a firework shoved up my rear and never looked back. Funnily enough, I had no repercussions for leaving detention, so it made me even more certain that he was planning something sinister. Anyway, it transpired that this music teacher who was married with kids was having an affair with one of the students, got her pregnant and left his wife for her. We felt horrified and sick. He must use that grin to lure his victims. We never saw Mr. Fishface again.
PUNKLMNOP says, I had these two guy friends. We're gonna call them Reese Tyler. I met Reese through Tyler because Tyler and I were hooking up at the time. I became really good friends with Reese. We did literally everything together. I thought he was going to be my lifelong friend. Until he started acting weird. He would get ridiculously drunk and demand money from me. He had a key to my place, and when I asked for it back he got so pissed off it was scary. I had to cut him off after that. A couple months passed and I reconnected with both Tyler and Reese. Big fucking mistake. We were all drinking pretty heavily and I overheard them both talking about sexually assaulting me. I was so drunk, I'm so glad my friend was there to tell them to get the fuck out of my apartment. Thank God for her. I don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there.
Karleyna says, years and years ago. Changed schools. Was supposed to wait in front of some office for my teacher. There was another kid. I immediately disliked him but couldn't point out why. Even worse, he was obviously from a different country and I didn't want to think racist thoughts. But I still hoped not to have anything to do with this guy. Ever. Yeah, he was also new and came into the same class I did. He quickly became one of a handful of the biggest troublemaker in the whole school. Arrested several times. Our class had a bad reputation, mainly, but not exclusively, because of him. I think he was also once involved in stealing a teacher's earring. Police came and all. In the end, he was excluded from our final year class trip but tramped there anyway. We were all told to shush about it and not tell our teacher. Me and the girls I shared a house with agreed not to go to our teacher but to also not lie if being confronted. We were confronted the same day, more like I know he is here and I know you know. He will have to leave. Please make no fuss about it and it'll be fine tbh. We weren't the least bit upset he had to leave and he was one of the people I was extreme glad to never see again.
Dontbejillous says. Smoking weed with a few friends. There was a guy there I had never met. He seemed weird. But he had all these rave bracelets on. I just assumed he has done a little too much ecstasy, other drugs and is a little off. 3 weeks later they catch him as the guy who committed a triple homicide about a year prior.
Ask the Redditors too says. I'd gone for a vacation in Galveston. There was a guy downtown. My wife liked him but not me. There was something underneath his smiling persona that gave off I'm a hypocrite vibes. Half an hour later, when we arrive in our hotel, my wife sees her phone is missing. She goes all frantic and we pull up the whole room for her phone. An hour's worth of searching every nook and cranny later, we decide she has to buy a new phone. That night, we meet this man again. We were dining in the hotel and it turns out this man stayed in the same hotel as us. Suddenly, the police walks in and grabs this guy. He's wanted for theft. Turns out, he'd stolen my wife's phone, had taken it stealthily from her pocket, and was about to take her wallet too, but we walked off from him before he got the chance. As of July 2019, he's still serving his quota in prison.
Harry2829 says. I was 13, so kind of stupid but hear me out. This guy I kind of knew for a few years suddenly really wanted to be my friend. I didn't have many friends so I accepted. Fast forward 8 months, the guy convinced my then GF to break up with me, with no explanation, and then fast forward another 5 months, some kids saw them having sex in the bathroom. So yeah, that's why I have had social anxiety for 5 years. Smile.
Shyanneabriana says. This girl I knew had this boyfriend. He always gave me the creeps and I never knew why. Turns out he had been threatening kids at our school with a weapon and got into serious trouble for it.
Set Discombobulated 50 says. This is gonna sound like joke but I'm dead serious. My parents broke up like a week before I was born then got back together when I was 3, and that was when I first met him. I was a very social child and loved meeting people but when I met him I even told my mom there was something about him I didn't like. Baby me literally had a gut feeling this guy was bad news and tried to make it clear but my mother said it was just because I was nervous about meeting new family. Believe it or not, I remember a lot from when I was 3 and up, but when I met his side of the family I loved them, it was just him. I literally felt like that every day of my life. Flash forward about 2 or 3 years and I walk into our basement after playing outside with a cousin and see him choking my mom. I freaked out, ran and told my older cousin. Flash forward another year and he regularly hit me, my mom, and my older cousin for no reason. Flash forward another 2 years and everyone finds out he's been doing drugs since I was born. He murdered someone when I was like 2. He had abused and nearly killed his girlfriend before my mother and even had another kid and no one in the family knew about any of this and when we found out everyone was shocked. He's now married and my little sister is the only one of us. I also have a brother, who still speaks to him in our family. He's still on drugs, he's married, and he's still a piece of shit. TLDR, when I met my father for the first time, I had a gut feeling and years later found out he was an abusive, drug-addicted murderer.
Deleted says. I don't want to go into details but I knew Dirty John. The first time I was introduced he lied about speaking a language I have studied since I was a teen. He immediately tried to play it off but the alarm bells were going off in my head. No one else noticed how smoothly he transitioned out of it.
Mental_Tiger5412 says. Living in NYC, there was a guy who spoke with a Russian accent that always hung around my group of frienda. Something about him just made me feel uneasy, but none of my friends felt the same way. Fast forward a couple years, that dude was arrested by US Marshals for sex offender stuff with a minor. Guy was not Russian but from some random Midwest state and had fled to NYC to hide out.
Travelingunraveling says. Husband and I travel a lot, usually to the less industrialized parts of the world. I hadn't been to Europe until a year ago, but we've been to over 40 countries. Everywhere we go, we have some locals try to hustle us, start walking with us asking if we need a ride or would we like to buy things. Most of the time, a local will act friendly first, ask where we are from, say nice things, then try to get us to come to their shop to buy things. We are used to it. Last summer, we were in Marrakesh and we'd been walking around much of the old city for several days. We like exploring the markets and trying to get away from the more touristy parts, and we ended up in a residential area outside of the main walls of the market. We saw kids playing, people walking. It was all nice. Then a young guy comes up to us. He's tall, maybe 23 or 24. He engages in conversation with us, saying the usual things and asking the usual questions. We keep walking and he walks with us. Again, this is normal, nothing we haven't experienced before. But I had a bad feeling. Something felt off but I didn't know why, so I trailed behind my husband and the guy a few feet to watch him. It wasn't long before I noticed he had taken the lead and we were now in a part of the residential area where there were no people. A few women walked by but that's it. Then I realized this guy was going to mug us. He had kept his right hand buried in his pants pocket and kept fiddling with something in there, never taking it out. I knew it had to be a knife or some weapon. Just as I was trying to think of a way to warn my husband, he took his glasses off, he has very minor vision problems, and put them in his pocket, which is what he does when he is preparing for a possible altercation. He knew. Thank God. I knew my role would be to run as fast as I could to find people and get help, but I couldn't remember where we'd come from and didn't want to run into a bigger group of people waiting for us. I start to sweat as the guy suggests we go left at the upcoming fork. He says he can show us part of the city that most tourists don't get to see. My husband, cool, says, I think we'll go right. They stare at each other and my mind is pure panic. The guy says, come on man, let me show you. I promise you won't be disappointed. Husband, we good. We're gonna go right. The guy sighs, looking flustered and says okay but continues to walk with us. I soon see him take his hand from his pocket and then immediately start to hear the noise of people. Yes. We were background witnesses. We get to the end of the street and find we're back on a main road, full of life. Husband says thanks to the guy for the information about Marrakesh and to have a good day. Guy gets mad and demands compensation for his time. Husband says he doesn't have anything on him, which is true. We never carry more than a small amount of local currency and an old ID on us and keep most of our money, cards and passports locked in our bags in our hotel. The guy insists we give him money, so my husband pulls out the only thing he has, which ends up being about $1. The guy looks completely insulted but knows he can't do anything in the middle of busy crowds of locals and tourists. I spent the rest of our walk terrified the guy would find us again or we'd go down the wrong path. Husband shrugged it off, but had been traveling long before me and grew up in a tough city so he just said I'm always ready.
Oliviaxmarie_ says. It's sending chills down my spine but I was near the border between Colorado and Albuquerque and I had to stop for gas. It was about 3 a.m. I give the man behind the counter my $20, and when he looked up at me, I swear to you his eyes were red, and for some reason I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. The bad feeling was almost tangible and it sent me into an anxiety attack as I drove away.
AMMO5 says. A friend of my best friend. She got in my best friend's car and acted like we had been friends for years. Something inside me was on high alert but she was being friendly so I let it go. The three of us started hanging out all the time and my best friend's schedule changed so it was just the two of us. This girl would text and if I didn't answer she would call. She'd make me feel guilty if I didn't answer right away but masked her comments as a joke. She would say she had no other friends and that's why she wanted to talk or see me. I gave her my time and money. I fell for her sob stories but she started lying to her family, her church, and bill collectors in front of me. She was verbally abusive to her boyfriend and the one time we went to a restaurant together she treated the staff like shit and said there was hair in the food and wouldn't pay. Getting out of that friendship was like waking up after being mind-controlled. After I cut ties I saw a counselor that said she was a narcissist.
Butcher99 says. So I'm the kind of person that shakes hands with someone when I meet them. For the most part, I feel like it's a good way to figure out what kind of person you're talking to. When I met my old best friend's boyfriend, I looked him in the eyes and shook his hand. He made no eye contact with me at all and barely grabbed my hand. It instantly made me feel off about him. He ended up being a bad dude that got her into meth. Thankfully they're broken up now and she's doing better.
BigMart63 says. Had a workmate who was much younger than me but we got on well. He was only with our company for about a year before he went to do another PhD. Anyway, he had a girlfriend that I instantly did not like. We all hung out together though, but I couldn't shake the feeling. He'd arrived looking for work with us after a 2-year around-the-world backpacking trip with his GF. At the end of their trip they stayed on St. John's in the Caribbean. They were camping but a local guy started chatting to them in the local tavern and said they could stay in his rental for free on his land that was empty at moment. He said phone is off so don't try and use it. My friend's GF did try and found it working. She ran up hundreds of dollars of calls at this bloke's expense to all her family and the friends they'd met on their travels. They left after not saying a word or paying anything for the accommodation or the food he provided them. She told me all this actually bragging about it like it was great to get one over on someone, to hustle them. I just thought grifter. I was glad when he left so I didn't have to be pleasant to such a CT anymore.
waterdoggo says. Not me but my dad who was around 11 or 12 at the time. So basically he was with his mom and his sister when they got in a mild car crash. So my dad's mom was trying to do something, I don't remember, but it required my dad and aunt to stay while she left. She was panicking but the person they got in a crash with said he could watch them, so hesitantly my dad's mom agreed and all turned out good, but my dad's mom was worried about the guy for some reason. He had a weird look or something I guess, but it turned out a month later or so they saw in the mail that the same guy from the car crash tried to murder some guy, and while it wasn't too scary for my dad, my grandma freaked out.
RaayvenWolfgirl says. When I was younger, I used to get this feeling around some adults. Friends of my mother, and they always turned out to be sexual predators. I learned to trust that feeling. Thank goodness I had not become a victim of more than touch by one. Last time I felt that, I was a late teen, and it was meeting someone that lived on my sister's ex-husband's parents' land. I never could handle being alone with him. Evidently the ex-husband's parents brought him, let him live in a trailer they had. He was a homeless person before. After meeting him, I told them they need to keep him away from the 2 girls the parents were taking care of. They called me crazy. Yeah. Turns out he was assaulting them sexually. A lot, and had some creepy pictures of me, when I didn't know he was taking them. Next victim style. They, however, took it as me being a evil devil worshipping witch that cursed him and made him do it.
Zanki says. Guy was having sex with a lower school student. We got this new teacher when I went in 6th form at my school. I didn't like this guy from day one and I never knew why. He very quickly started skipping our classes and just signing us all in as being there. He was supposed to teach us, but he never showed up, saying his real classes were more important than ours. My class all failed the stupid general studies A-level thanks to him. I didn't like the fact that this guy was doing this, but complaining fell on deaf ears. A year or so after I had left, I found out from some kids who were still at school that he had been fired for sleeping with a student. It was so gross. He would have met that little girl when she was 12, the girl was in year 10, 14-15 years old, when they were caught. Another person who I wasn't happy about being near was an actor. Well, said actor ended up killing someone and is now in jail. We talked about how we didn't like him. I even mentioned it to another actor who had worked with the guy and said something was really off about him.
Nurse Barbie 098 says. My boss, every time she talks to me on a personal level, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and I always have the desire to immediately leave a room or go out of my way to not be around her. She has times she tries to be likable or have normal conversation and it feels so forced and fake. Like when you talk to someone who hates you but has to be nice to you, except she is this way to all my coworkers.
TrainingSecret says. My sister's first BF. At first I couldn't quite tell what was off about him, but then I noticed stuff. Like, he would look at me over her shoulder when he kissed her, as if saying she is mine. He was also very trolling, always wanted to know where she was and with whom. Once I was talking with a friend of mine and my sisters, and she mentioned how my sis wasn't a virgin anymore. I thought it strange that she hadn't talked to me about it, because usually she'd talk to me about stuff like that. So I asked her about it and she admitted that her BF had pressured her into sex. It was a few weeks before they broke up, and her current BF of 5 years, and I still wait for opportunity to beat up her ex.
Absent-minded one says, mine is a bit long, but it lasted 4 years. And nobody ever thinks it can happen to them. I was a strong, independent 28-year-old. I met a guy online and things grew to where we met. I guess there are a few red flags that, upon looking back, I ignored. This would change my life. We did the visits and then finally decided to move in together. He was in the Midwest and I the Southeast. Since he had children from his first marriage, I insisted that I move there. A flag was his willingness to leave those children behind. Others were sexual and made me uncomfortable. Not long after moving there, I became pregnant. I was so sick that I had to stop working and I reluctantly agreed to move to his mother's until we found a lower-cost residence. The first time I met his mother, I got the willies, full on. But I chalked it up to hormones. Not was I wrong. To make this short, aside from finding out that he was still married, his wife thought they were trying to reconcile. His mother was about to show true colors. She was on food stamps etc. and about to lose medical. She managed to smear her daughter gain custody of her grandson to keep benefits. On top of this, she got my SSN, probably while I was showering, and used it to get food at food drives and we weren't allowed any of it. When I was in the hospital giving birth, she was in a neighboring state attempting to kidnap her granddaughter. She planted video cameras in her room and called me, saying she forgot something. Could I get it? I had no idea where. It was planned, so she got video of me rummaging through her room. She showed my fiancé and used that plus a time she gave me allergy medicine to start and turn him against me. Lying, saying I stole it. She would bang cupboards, take silverware at 5 o'clock. Apparently she hoarded TP under her bed, claimed I stole some. We bought all our own supplies. The worst was her breaking my cell phone and accidentally knocking a lamp over onto my laptop and breaking it. Around this, I was looking for work. My car mysteriously stopped working. All of my lifelines were cut. She disconnected the telephone in the kitchen to ensure I had no contact with my family. She had already called my parents and made up lies about me, adding more strain to our relationship. When we bought a cake to hook my laptop to a monitor, she saw to it to disconnect the router or change the Wi-Fi password. So my parents didn't think much when I wasn't heard from for a few months. Finally my mom got through. This woman wouldn't take her calls, but she cared very much what others thought of her, you know the type. Calculated, full of gossip and all the while afraid of a bad image. So through a stroke of genius, my mom got her mother's phone number and finally that phone appeared and I could call her back. The worst by far, was what she did to my beloved dog. She stole our dog food for her dogs. We would buy more, but same story or it would get ruined. I went on a flight to have baby meet my parents, before the food bit. When I returned, my beloved pup was infested with fleas, had worms and was emaciated. Now my fiancé was in on it. We lived in the boonies. Nearest vet was 20 miles out. She wouldn't give a ride to the vet. Taxis wouldn't take a dog in the car. I called a mobile vet. She saw them arrive and raced out, threatening them if they stayed in the property. I tried it again, different company, while she was supposed to be out for an extended time, but she got back just as they came. It was winter and constantly snowing. I made the decision to bundle up both of my babies and make the walk. Praying a Samaritan pickup truck would help. Help didn't come, but she somehow found me. Her and her BF threw us in the truck and forced us home. After the calls to vets, she removed the phone again. Less than a week later, my beloved fur baby passed away and it haunts me probably forever. To make matters worse, any chance she got if I was in shower or walking my baby, she took video of my dog. She made me watch it. On it, Aside from the devastating images was her shrill voice asking how I could do such a thing and so on. Losing my fur baby destroyed me. A dog like that comes but once in a lifetime. And to harm an animal is beyond disgusting. I bear that on my soul. My grandfather passed away and my mom used that trick of embarrassing her, to let me know. In that call she mailed me a phone and stated planning to get me out of there. I thought I had love with my fiancé. He agreed to move with me right after some seminar he had to go to on the West Coast was done. I was to pack our things and go with my parents. He would fly to us direct from seminar location. He never came. I endured months of tears begging him to come. To make my family whole. Now I'm glad he didn't come. I cut it when he told me he wanted to watch me have intercourse with a dog. My freedom came at a hefty price, and a parting gift of an STI. I wish I had heeded that first impression of all of them from a narcissist to psychopath. Also he wouldn't bother with his kids unless I pushed for it and then he didn't spend any time with them, I did. And twice his family tried to convince me to meet them kind of halfway, to see my children. The only time I heard from him was those time and he said not to go, they were plotting to kidnap my babies. I wish this were fiction, but I couldn't make this up if I tried. Please be vigilant and trust those feelings, it could save your life.
MILLICENTIPIED says, okay, so this happened pretty recently. One of my friends is adamant that she needs a boyfriend, and she takes any chances she gets. Let's call her Ellie. We had this new boy at school, let's call him Scott, and he was the full-on rugby player. He'd been kicked from all other schools in the area and was held back a year, so he was a lot older than us. We are the youngest in our year, her being 10 days older than me. I didn't meet him before they began dating, and from what I had heard beforehand he seemed nice. Ellie told me that he was a gentleman and he acted like a bodyguard, and she seemed really happy about their relationship. But as soon as I saw him I got a sinking feeling in my stomach, and I think he caught on that I wasn't falling for whatever he was doing. Now I am not the type of person who takes any shit, even if I was smaller than him I don't back down to anything. Over the weeks I noticed he only had his guard up on me, and not with the rest of my friends. I kept telling Ellie that he was bad news, but she said, apologized for later as well, that I couldn't say anything because I had only ever dated girls. But it all crumbled when my other friend, call her Jen, caught on to my skepticism and saw what I did. Jen is about the same size as Scott, and we already knew he was intimidated by her because even though he could take on a human, Jen trains the temperamental horses at the stables nearby. As soon as he knew we were both onto him he dropped the act altogether, so far as kissing one of our other friends in front of Ellie. We all kicked him out the group and made sure Ellie was okay, but he stuck around for a bit, before being expelled for beating up another student and putting them in hospital. I knew that student too, and as much as what he did to them was horrid I would say they deserved it, but just not as bad. I saw him again in town as we have just moved year groups and he has left the schooling system now. He was at his job in Subway, and because I am a petty piece of shit, I got my favorite and most confusing sub, footlong with extra cheese, meatballs and almost all the toppings, refilled ringcake, and yes, I ate it all because I shouldn't waste it. Haven't seen him since and I hope I never do again. He was really horrible to everyone but Ellie for most of our time with him and became toxic when we knew about his plans. If he was nicer he actually might have gotten away with it.
Shiva's Kratom 3 says, had a buddy. Remember the episode of Parks and Rec where Ben and Aubrey Plaza work in DC for some dude's campaign? He was so robotic. Hung out with him for maybe 6 months before it was all too weird. It was a meaningful friendship in everything but his emotions. He just faked happiness, memories, laughing and bonding, but whenever it came down to it he didn't give a fuck about you. Since I stopped hanging he got 2 rape allegations, 3 or 4 cheating, and got in a physical fight with a girl.
NightlyWraith says, happened 2 years ago. Was on the bus, there was this guy shaking profusely like a chihuahua. Even though it was about 80 degrees inside the bus. I told the bus driver as I got off, and needless to say I saved a guy from dying of a overdose of some kind. About a month later I was told by the same driver that I saved his life.
Anxious_inflation_you_93 says. Back when I was in 9th grade I was at a boarding school. Now this was not one of these rich kids boarding school, but a boarding school where the state would put all the kids with no parents/bad parents. Now our building where my class was a square with 2 classrooms to each side, and then the front door to the outside where we could be at break time. I was standing at the corner which was longest away from the front door, with my back to the door, telling a story to my friends who were facing the front door. While I was telling the story, my mind suddenly froze. I was still telling the story, but my mind was suddenly focused totally on the doorknob at the front door, that I could not see. And yet in my mind, I saw a hand touching the doorknob and starting the movement to open the door. Meanwhile I was still telling the story to my friends. The minute that hand touched the door, all my hairs stood up on my legs and arms. And this really cold feeling crept all the way into my heart. It was like I got flooded in ice. Now bear in mind, I was like socially the lowest social level in this boarding school, since I was not someone who dare especially much. I did not get along well with the other kids, because they misbehaved most of the time, and took drugs, were violent etc., and I was the good student, always doing my homeworks, always raising my hand in class, and never was violent. But I was standing there, with the ice feeling in my whole entire body and my brain just started to scream, while I kept telling the story to my friends. And then I could feel the person's footsteps all the way through the square. I could not see the person, but I could definitely feel the person with every little atom in my body. And this person was walking straight up to me. I could feel what she wanted. She only wanted to introduce herself as a new student. The second the person reached right behind me, and started saying, "Hi, I am 30, it whirled around, and slapped her hard in the face, so she fell on the ground, while screaming and pointing at / to her, "Don't you ever come near me again, you understand? Don't you ever even come into the same room as me. Is that clear?" Then I ran all I could back to that apartment we slept in. My friends was just in disbelief, they had never seen me being violent ever. But she kept away, which was good, since I could feel her bad presence even if she was in the building next to us, just like a little sense in the brain being alert. 2 months later she got kicked out of the boarding school. By then she had been sleeping with everyone's boyfriends, and had stolen everything she could from other students. And gotten in 4 fights. I saw her in the news 15 years later. She had killed her 2 kids, while her husband was out walking the dogs. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison since they did not find that she was mentally sick. That is also what I think, she was not mentally sick, she was just plain evil. She liked being mean to others and hurt others. I could feel how the evil was overflowing from her. I had this feeling another time. Exactly the same. But that was just a person I went by in the street, so I have no idea if I was right about him. But the exact same feeling. This time I could avoid him and thus not hit him. Another time I was at a job interview. I really wanted the job since it would increase my current pay with over 60%. Everything seemed fine, until the boss that I was supposed to work for entered. He gave me the same feeling, although not so strong as the first 2 times. This time I did not have the urge to hit him. But my brain was in red the whole time, screaming danger, danger etc. I ended up talking myself out of the job, without it looking too obvious. I went home. Met a friend of mine who was this lovely lady, who had flipped at night 3 a.m. with her 3-year-old son on the arm, from her insane husband who tried to kill them both. He was a real psychopath. I had never met him. She asked me how the job interview went, and I said I did not get it. She asked where it was, and I said at Forex company. She looked at me in horror, and said, "What department?" I said Department X, and she said, "That is where my ex-husband is boss, did you meet him?" I guess I did,
Starfire-Galaxy says, a couple years ago, I was shopping in Walmart and I ran into my cousin and a man I hadn't seen before. He seemed friendly, but my mind was saying get the fuck away from him. We went our separate ways and I forgot about it until an older relative mentioned his name a few days later. Ugh, that man is a horrible person. I don't know what your cousin sees in him. Do you mean this man? He was nice, what's wrong with him? He molested a little girl years ago when she was a toddler. That's why he was in prison for so long. Aftermath, my cousin was denied guardianship of her kids until she dumped the guy, which took almost a year for her to realize the toddler wasn't making up stories. Then it took another year for her to accept that he wasn't going to change by the power of her love, and she slowly stopped going to his parole hearings after he beat up his girlfriend.
wearethefreaks says. New deputy head teacher. Looked like Voldemort, to the point that kids got suspended for photoshopping his face into Harry Potter pictures and putting them as the background on all school computers. He was weird as fuck and gave off bad vibes. He often called a student from our year group, age 16, age of sexual consent in my country, to his office randomly. One night some of the student's friends were hanging at his house and stumbled across a child porn website built by said student. Reported to the authority and teachers/head teacher. Student got a few years of therapy. Deputy head tried to flee the town and got a lot of jail time for at least a TB of child porn on his laptop.
barneybbates says. They were on the wrong end of crazy, and treated me and my girlfriend very poorly. We had to live with them for 2 months, in their home.